on all the aspects of our gen plan. And as the cost of building and of all resource types, it's not just natural gas that's seeing an increase in costs due to lots of federal policy changes and just supply chain constraints in general. We're seeing all resource types creep up in costs. We're going to continue to be extremely thoughtful about those things, but we also are going to, we're going to double down on STEP. As the cost of building increases, that cost per KW goes up, the value of conservation just gets more valuable. And so, as we go through our STEP, we're in year 3, but as we look at STEP programs and continue to refine, we're going to be thoughtful and deliberate, because at the end of the day, one of the guiding principles we have here is to be as competitive as possible, to manage our costs as competitively as possible. We're very fortunate, if those of you who might have seen the last board meeting, we now are $20 below the next lowest large metropolitan area, which is El Paso. So we're what, 179?
Yeah, high 170s.
Combined electric, levelized, normalized electric and gas, compared to almost 200 in El Paso, and then everybody else is above 200. We want to continue to make smart decisions across the entire value chain to continue to lower those costs, because you probably saw the census report, San Antonio is the 3rd, most impoverished large metropolitan community in the United States. So it's so important for us to manage affordability across the entire value chain, including conservation and demand response, in order to help our customers who are struggling and help begin to lift this community up in prosperity. So just wanted to add a couple of little color points there.
Thank you. And so that's kind of what I was getting at, because you say long-term bill savings is long-term, not in next year, a couple years, because we're in a situation, as you mentioned, where we have a lot of folks who are struggling with costs. I don't have the recent numbers right now on disconnections, but they're on the order of 100,000 folks who are late or at risk of disconnection right now in the area. And so when you say savings, I mean, people are worried about costs, they're worried about their bills, but it's not actually, this is not going to actually help on bill savings in the coming year or 2 years. We're talking about, 5 years from now.
No,
That's
I mean,
what I'm hearing.
it avoids the impact of what life has done, right? So the cost estimates have been what they are. So yeah, I mean, to your point, from an expectation perspective, I think we stay consistent with the expectations we sent 2 years ago or 3 years ago when we did the plan. And the bill savings is relative to what the costs are today as opposed to back then. So fair point. And I think, and just to punctuate the point that was from your earlier question, comparing the natural gas cost to the other generation types, well, I appreciate where it's coming from. The generation plan, when we discuss it, is relative to those goals. So I think to Elena's point, and to Rudy's earlier point, we had huge battery storage goals and solar goals and wind goals. And the benchmark to that, when we report out later on that, is how are we executing those relative to today's prices, right? And I think we're at or a little bit lower from what I recommend or recall. So I think in both kind of buckets of power generation, we're coming in kind of better than what exists today. But nonetheless, your point is taken. We do a ton of work, and Deanna's team speaks to all the work we do for our customers that need assistance.
And if I can give a shameless plug, if you're hearing us as a customer and you are in need, reach out to us. We are not out just in the night trying to shut people off. We understand how critical electricity is to every part of and gas to every part of every person's life. If you're struggling, reach out to us. We'll put you on a payment plan. We'll work with you. We'll figure it out.
And just a comment, if I could, Julian, you're right with respect to your question, but it's important to put in context that CPS is not about solving exclusively next year's rates. It's about a long-term plan, and the investments, the time horizons that you need to look at to invest in a power plant is tens of years, right? And I think it's really important to put that in context to Corey's answer about rates and when they impact, right? Is that we've got to balance today, tomorrow, and then way out in the future. And I think that's really an important component of this.
I know that we have, Michael had a question, and I want us to make sure we get also to the next presentation as well.
One quick question.
Yes, so let's go ahead and get to that. I think that this is what this conversation has also brought up is a great challenge for us to ensure that when we're communicating rates and how this will be impacting, that we are educating the community proactively to ensure that there is no confusion of what's going on. But Michael, I'd like to just go ahead and so we can continue to keep the
Sure.
process
Yeah,
moving.
you said there's contracts in place to sell some of this energy already, so we've already obligated part of this energy. So I guess what I'm asking is, how much of this capacity is going to actually be available for our peaking needs during the period of time that we have these contracts, and are we only putting what's really going to be available to us in the generation plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, there's sort of what we put in, what we acquire, and we do this with our existing assets, right? We will where we have periods of time where there might be excess capacity, where we have assets that we don't need all of that power for what our community's using, we sell it to other people, right? That's Corey talked about the $250 million that were coming off these new assets. We bought those early. We still have plants that we haven't retired, but we got them for a good price, so we're selling those forward. Right now, we have about 75% of this capacity under a heat rate call option, which is a contract to be able to call and sell power to entities. Those are going to be rolling off over the next few years. Some are rolling off very quickly. Some are rolling off the next couple years, 2-3 years. We've layered that into not only our generation plan expectations, but also into our forecast of when these assets are going to be able to be monetized, both in the wholesale market and also for our retail customers. So the answer is, we do this with our existing assets. That 3/4, 75% coverage is actually revenue that we can bank on. We're going to get that revenue. So, but we may not continue those into the future. We may do something more accretive for our customers.
And I think to punctuate that, to help think about that on a timeline, we were going to start an RFP this year to begin the procurement and the building of natural gas peaking assets to be available in that 2030-31 timeframe. So that concept of growing into those assets but monetizing it in the near term, that's exactly what we're doing. So it's for us in terms of the money we get now, and then it's for us for the actual load that's showing up in that timeframe, if that helps.
I just had one more question. Thank you. So there's a bullet point that says emission rate reductions are comparable to current portfolio plan. Can you put a number to that? What are the reductions?
And I'll get you the specific numbers. Right now, and I'm going to give you round numbers because I don't have them in front of me, but right now our portfolio, when you look at our carbon, and I'm going to speak to carbon intensity. Look, we look at all emissions. We look at our water consumption, we look at SOx, we look at NOx, we look at SF6, we look at methane, we look at all kinds of emissions, but I think what you're talking about is really kind of carbon. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but our carbon emissions right now are about 900 pounds per megawatt hour, something between 850 and 900. As we step forward into 2030, we're going to see those drop by 40% or more. And then as we step forward into time and get closer to 2040, we're going to be somewhere closer to a third of that, right? So kind of in that probably 400 range. And a big part of that is we're moving away from coal. That's going to be a huge piece. And we're doing that predominantly for financial reasons, right? One of our assets is getting near end of life. And then we're moving away for financial reasons. But then, as we sunset those larger gas units, like you can think about the Summers units, you can think about the Braunig units we are working to retire. Those heat rates or those efficiencies of those units are about the same as these machines we bought, but they're big machines. They require more costs. They require more water. They produce a lot of, they produce emissions, and these are just much more agile machines. Those come on, they run for many hours, even when they're, when maybe they can't move as quickly as these machines. These machines come on when we need them, they come off, and they're not producing emissions when we don't need them. So all of those things are going to be helpful to that emissions profile over time. We can certainly give you those numbers, but in round numbers, we're going from 900 down to the sub 400 over the next decade and a half.
Thank you. Yeah, so I would love to see that and to have that data there, because when we talk about meeting goals under the cap, we need to put data and numbers behind that, because in this presentation we don't have that data. My other concern with emissions is these power plants are not in the San Antonio area. So when we're talking about the Spruce plant, right, we're going to shut down that coal-fired power plant that would presumably improve emissions in this area, right, because we're not burning coal. So when we talk about local air quality, shutting down the coal-fired power plant is going to help, right? Big time, okay? And we know that natural gas generation, the emissions profile is different from coal, whatever, but it still produces emissions, only these emissions aren't impacting our local area. It's the people who live in and around, in Brazoria County, Harris County, Galveston County. So I'm concerned that there's, we're introducing these negative externalities into these communities because they have to deal with the pollution, but we get the energy. And the same with the scenario in the power plants in Laredo and in Corpus. I'm concerned about the precedent that sets in terms of how we deal with the emissions that we produce for our energy and who it impacts. Because if it's in this area, CPS ratepayers, if we have an issue with air pollution, with carbon emissions, we can come down here to the Board of Trustees and say, hey, I have an issue with the CPS power plant that's producing emissions in my area. These folks don't have that opportunity, so I just wanted to get that out there.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments. I did want to kind of put a point on a couple of things. One, we are going to be converting a coal unit in our current gen plan. We're about to refresh it, but we will be converting one of our coal units to natural gas, which, to your point, and you're absolutely right, air quality from power generation sources will improve over time here locally. All of these plants, and we've operated assets throughout ERCOT for many years. We've had STP since the early 80s, which has been down on the Gulf Coast, and we have assets throughout the entire state. They are all regulated from an environmental perspective by the EPA and TCEQ. So I do want to make sure that folks know, we're making decisions not based on, hey, we want to have an asset somewhere else because we live here. It's not. This is purely about making sure that we're meeting our objectives of having highly reliable, affordable, and cleaner sources of energy for our customers and looking at the available options for those. But absolutely, those assets are very regulated, and all customers have the ability to go before those bodies, should there be concerns. But we will operate these in high degrees of compliance and corporate responsibility. So with that,
Thank you, Elena. We're going to move on to our next presentation. Our next presenters are going to be David Key, the Director of Energy Market Policy, and Kevin Paulos, Senior Director of Asset Management.
I think I turned it off the first time. Good afternoon, everybody. So for those I haven't met, Kevin Paulo, I recognize some familiar faces from when we went through the original generation plan a couple of years ago, but very happy to be here talking with you today along with my colleague David Key. And I think as we talk about, Rudy introduced the Gen Plan refresh, I think, very well at the beginning of the meeting. But when we look at the effort and why we're here today, to me, it's twofold, right? One is we want to inform you about the project, give an overview of what we're doing, kind of why we're doing it. But I think, and David will cover this as we get through the presentation, I think it's also important to provide some insight on, we want insight from you, right, as we go through this process. So there's some different topics, questions that we'll show as we go through the presentation that we want you all to be thinking about over the next few months as we work through this process, because input from this group of folks, I think will be very important to inform, where we end up on the process. Let's see here. That was probably the wrong button. As we said, the first, we'll just go through a quick agenda. We're going to go through a kind of a high-level timeline of what we're going through, hit some key points on our approach, and some key dates along the way, if you will. But really, when we look at this generation plan refresh, it directly ties back. It directly links to the Vision 2027 generation plan that the board approved in January of 2023. So I think a very thorough community involvement in the process we had a few years ago that led us to the generation plan. And as Rudy said, we've been executing on that since the day it was approved. This is a snapshot of that generation plan. We've talked, Elena mentioned it as well, but the basis of that plan, we knew we had load growth to address. We knew we had coal units that we wanted to retire or convert. We knew we had aging gas steam units that we wanted to retire. And so the generation additions that we added back in, we landed on a very diversified, balanced portfolio. And you can see the different types of resources that we're going to add. The renewables category, up there covers wind, solar, storage. But we've been moving along this path since the board approved the plan. This is actually an updated view of the generation plan because it already captures the Corpus Christi and Laredo additions. But yes, Mr. Corser.
So I think you might have answered it already, but I was going to ask, what is the difference between this plan and the one Elaine presented, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago to us? Just so I can kind of understand what you're updating.
So I believe what Elena was talking about a couple months ago would be our Vision 2030 and our Horizon 2050 plan. So, when we look at kind of the future of the utility over the next 25 years, what are we doing? Obviously, our generation plan and how we serve the community is an integral part of both of those. The Vision 20, originally started with Vision 2027. As Rudy said, that's being updated to Vision 2030, right? To move us along to the end of the decade. And then we also have the Horizon 2050 plans in place on how we address the long-term future of the utility in terms of where we fit in with our community. So to me, this generation plan, as I said, is an integral part of that, right? In terms of how we're investing money and in what types of resources we're investing our money in to serve the community from a generation standpoint.
The source of my question is in context of what we've already learned, right, from the prior presentation. What's different? Is there an update, or is this a perspective of 2027 plan of kind of the same content that was presented earlier?
Fair. I think I appreciate your clarification there. Where we're introducing with this presentation is when we look at the board-approved generation plan from the Vision 2027 plan, we are working through a process now, and we'll get to it as we work through the slides, and David will start to talk about it here actually on the next slide, on refreshing that plan, right? So there have been several things that have changed. We'll talk about that. Rudy mentioned it in terms of load growth. State law, federal laws have changed. Cost of generation, all different types of generation has changed. We've seen part of the plan all along when we had the Vision 2027 plan is how can we improve that as we execute? So as Corey and Elena talked about, as we've had the opportunities to acquire assets instead of build them, it's allowed us to introduce savings into the plan and put generation into our portfolio quicker than anticipated. There's also part of the original resolution from the board also directed us to continue to look at technology advancements and how do we integrate new technology. So there's been a tremendous amount of momentum, for example, in the last couple of years around new nuclear, small modular reactors and things like that, long duration energy storage. So we are looking with this generation plan refresh at what our approved plan is, and are there opportunities to improve that plan further, whether it's in cost, whether it's introducing, leveraging some of those new technology advancements to improve or accelerate our progress towards the cap goals that Rudy talked about. That's the scope of what we want to look at here with this plan. So that's what we wanted to introduce to you today is the start of that effort. Does that answer your question, sir? Yep. Yeah, we actually have a slide on that we'll get to here. Yeah, okay.
Okay. Let's go ahead and move forward. Yes, sir.
So David, I think, will cover the next couple slides, and then we'll get to some more statistics here at the end.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Good afternoon, everybody. Wanted to talk here about overall big picture, what are we doing? We have this project. Our company continually looks at our position in the market. We look at planning from a long-term perspective on a regular basis, but there's certain points we just need to elevate our activities and start working on actually making changes. And so this is the beginning of that effort. This shows a view of all the different touch points we're going to be having. Key here is we're going to be working towards a December, January timeframe worth of results, bringing the results to the various places, including the Board of Trustees for an overall recommendation and maybe an endorsement of the recommendation or maybe some redirection. So we're bringing you this process as we're going through it. A lot of this that we're going to be talking about is ongoing work that's happening right now. So a lot of this information is going to be updated and be changing. This is where we're at right now, and this is the point that we need some feedback and some input. So that's what we'll be talking through today. When we talk about this project out in the community, we're going to be looking at it from a two-phase approach. Right now, we're in the middle of phase one, basically telling everybody what exactly are we doing? Why are we doing this? What does the generation plan even mean? Some in the community may not be aware. So really trying to bring up the level of understanding from folks and work through what it is that we're doing. We have some key dates here that shows the various touch points that we've had with our internal messaging. And as we work through that, we're going to finish up with our Operations Oversight Committee, which is a committee of our board. Further on in the rest of the year, as the results start to come in, we start to get something more tangible. We'll be bringing that out to the community in our phase 2 of the messaging, and we have some additional touch points here. Yeah, I don't know if we have anything that shows our actual community input, but there's going to be a whole array of different touch points with the community. Will be at pop-ups and different events, town halls, things like that. But basically, phase 2 is going to show the what if, what happens, what's happening, what's our recommendation. Focusing in on our phase 1 efforts, we're going to talk about the generation plan. We have a really good plan in place. We're going to show how we're executing to the plan, even show how we're improving upon the plan, and really showing, like we mentioned earlier, the ways that we've been successful. I think the big key takeaway for the community is going to be why now? Talk about the changes that we need to evaluate. There's load growth, population growth. We're seeing this is just a very hungry state, very hungry community for energy, and we need to figure out how to meet that. And so that's going to be a key point that we make into our community, and we're talking about the need to continue to stay ahead of these changes. Technology is going to be integral as part of the discussion. Renewable technologies, less carbon intensive or carbon-free technologies, those are all changing, and so we want to update our assumptions and see what the results show there. That has to be balanced with our updated federal and state policies to help with all that. So working through our phase 1, we're going to really show all the changes that we are experiencing as an industry. We are very much out in the trenches as far as energy policy, energy markets, and so we have this view. We have to take that view and take it to the community, really show them how things are changing. This is where I think we're going to be asking the questions. This is really our overall narrative. And the questions that we're thinking about answering and helping our community understand are shown here. And I think this thing may be on a timer. We'll have to fix that. Sorry about that. But basically, our approved generation plan, trying to understand what it is, where did it come from. We mentioned earlier execution to the plan. We plan to show, what have we done? How have we made it better? How have we tried to save money and still show the values of our current generation plan? And like I spoke to, the current state of the world, how is that changing? For the plan refresh, basically, how do we make this plan better? It's already a really good plan. I'm still fighting this thing. Sorry, guys. We're still working through this plan. It's a very good plan, but how can we make it better? What are the things we need to think about? What's important to the community? Reliability, costs, carbon intensity. I'll just get used to pushing this button. Sorry, guys. And then we're going to be providing our recommendations and results, like I mentioned. And the other thing is, and I think we mentioned it earlier, how does this fit into the bigger strategic picture of the company, right? This is a piece of our larger strategy. As a company, we're not just a generation company, we're a wires company, we're a gas company, we serve customers. So how does our generation plan fit into that bigger overall picture? And then how does it impact our stakeholders? So I'll let this roll over, but these are the questions we want some input on, feedback. Are we asking the right questions? Are we moving in the right direction? We can circle back once we're done this because I'm tired of fighting it, sorry. So Kevin will take over, continue talking through some of these other slides.
So this slide is one that the core is alluding to, and Elena rattled some of these statistics off just verbally. But when you look at the Vision 2027 generation plan, again, well ahead of schedule as far as adding capacity. One of the things I'll point out, though, when you look at this slide and tie back to the other graphical version of the generation plan that showed by year what we were adding and what we were retiring, the timeline on that, the focus on that was between 2023 and 2030. So part of what's different, I think, with this generation plan refresh is as we look at our generation plan, which specifically called out, what types of capacity we were adding by quantity, what years we were making those additions, what years we were making retirements. Again, that focus was largely through 2030. As we look at changing Vision 2027 to Vision 2030, this refresh of the generation plan will also start to lock in and educate what are we doing as we get into the early 2030s, right? We have a plan that we continue to execute on to get to 2030, but then we need the next step, right? And as Rudy talked about earlier, it takes several years in some cases to site, permit, build a generation plant. Even as we look at power purchase agreements on solar, storage, wind, if the developer has to, again, if they're building a new resource, it takes time to, again, go through the interconnection process, go through the construction process. There's supply chain constraints, lead times are much longer than they used to be. So the intent for us here is to get out in front of all that. So we have plans in place. We have a plan, as Rudy said, to anchor to. So we have clear line of sight into what we're doing between now and the end of the decade and how we enter the next decade as well. We continue to work on this. Rudy and Elena talked about we're working through a wind RFP right now, looking for up to 400 megawatts to add. Was a mention of a solar RFP. Right now we're targeting trying to get release that solar RFP to the market next month. We'll probably be looking for up to 400 megawatts of solar with that RFP. So we continue to, even though a lot of the recent attention or headlines may have been around the natural gas acquisition, we still continue to aggressively pursue our portfolio around wind and solar and storage. We've covered a lot of this already, but as we look at different headwinds, tailwinds, the addition of new generating units has accelerated our progress on the generation plan, but a lot of the things that are listed as headwinds I think we've talked about. But a lot of that is why we're looking at doing this generation plan refresh right now, right? When we look at load forecast, for example, Rudy talked about some of the changes. But when we did the generation plan effort and worked through that generation planning process 3 years ago, we were looking at a little over 100 megawatts a year of peak load growth. As we look over the next roughly 7 to 10 year horizon, that number is now probably double that. And so again, it means that we need to look at how much of each type of resource we're adding and where do we have opportunities to improve upon the plan to make sure that we are adding the right amount of resources at the right time to meet our community's needs. This last slide we'll talk about is a pretty technical slide, but the purpose there is to show that as we look through this generation plan refresh, we're going to look at alternative pathways on how we might move forward, right? We have an approved generation plan. That is the path, that is the baseline, and that will be part of what we analyze. But as we look at that, again, looking at just the load growth, issue, for example, with the change in load forecast, if we just stick with the plan that was approved 3 years ago, we're not going to be adding enough generation over time to continue to meet the community's needs, which means it'll drive us to purchasing power from the market, for example. A viable solution, but it has costs, it has risks, as do any of these pathways, and that's what we want to look at, right? But the main focus isn't to start from scratch and kind of throw away the generation plan that we had. It's actually to keep the generation plan that we had and look at how we can improve it, right? Again, can we do things, leverage new technology, which can either change our cost structure perhaps or accelerate our progress towards our cap goals. That's the main things that we want to look at is how can we take the plan that we had and try to make it better and meet the new needs of the community, if you will, in terms of growth. So that will be the focus as we talk about, as David talked about, phase 1, phase 2. Phase 1 of this project is I think, talking to the community about why we're here, why we're doing this effort. In the meantime, we're working through all the technical analysis and the detailed modeling that we have to do. And then phase 2, if you will be as we get to the end of that modeling, we have some information to really, numbers, if you will, to talk about. That's what we'll bring forward to you, to other community groups. We'll be talking to city council, we'll obviously be talking to the board, but what we want ultimately is for the board, we'll make a recommendation to the board, and we're hoping that feedback from this group will support that recommendation, and that will lead to the board the ability to make a decision on whether we stay with the plan we had, or if we found ways to improve it, then we potentially alter our path slightly to take advantage of those opportunities for improvement. So that's really what we had to share with you all today, and happy to take some questions.
Thank you for the presentation, Kevin and David. Kevin, and we had this conversation at length when we went through the gen plan originally about STEP, demand response, and we talked about the fifth fuel. And Rudy alluded to it, that it wasn't factored in, and I kind of want to clarify what that means, and that this time we were going to incorporate it. And I remember we were going through those numbers, and we did see the impact, and it's such a dual benefit, obviously, because it's the demand response, but then it's also the energy efficiency, because I believe the affordability that comes with that program is really at the core what's going to really have the greatest impact on the customer that's having a challenge with their affordability. And so I want to see, how do you factor it in? Because I didn't, obviously we don't see it in the gen plan, and yet when we went through that whole process, it was in there, and we did see the value. And so what's the difference? What are we going to do different? Because it's a great advocacy for it if it also shows that dual purpose.
I think it's a great question. As we look at that, I think one of the things that we'll have to really focus on is how do we show that contribution? Because when we went through the effort 3 years ago, the impacts of STEP and everything that we've done over the years with STEP was included, but it wasn't explicit, right? It wasn't easy to see, meaning the way we generally have treated that over the years is we look at our load forecast, what we think the community will use in terms of energy, and then the impacts of STEP, energy efficiency, have effectively been included to reduce what that load forecast is. But we need to be able to show, I think, either show the effects of energy efficiency and STEP either on the generation side, or be able to clearly show it as here's what our load forecast is without STEP, and here's the impacts of STEP. So I think it's been in the numbers all along. We just I think we can do a better job of showing the community what the impact is and how we factor it into the plan.
Sort of a continuation of that, how are we making sure we're not double counting our STEP numbers? In other words, if our forecasts are already based on savings that we've gotten by implementing STEP, and now we're going to look at STEP as a generation asset, we run the risk of double counting STEP. How do we make sure we don't do that?
I think that it goes into how we do our load forecasting, if you will, and I think we build generally a load forecast, and then we have the effects of STEP that we roll into that. So we have the historical numbers, and we have kind of our projections of STEP impact going forward. And so I think the process now does a good job of making sure that we understand the difference between what our unabated load forecast, unmitigated load forecast would be, and then how we factor in the effects of STEP. Right now, I think we've done a really good job of ensuring we're not double counting. The specifics of exactly the details of load forecasting, I'm probably not the best person to answer. But I think as we get through the process, we'll have a better answer for you, I think, as we go forward, just to reassure you that how we do it so that we don't run into that double counting aspect.
Steve?
I'm curious because you made just a short reference to nuclear earlier in your presentation, but nuclear is almost totally neglected in this thing, in this plan. Is it because there's no substantial increase in capacity for nuclear? Because it's a big, important part of our total generation plan. I know we're gaining 2% by increased ownership of the South Texas plant. That's some increase, but I'm not seeing any. But I guess because it's such small, it's not really a huge capacity addition. Is that why it's being ignored, or is this a conversation for after 2030?
Well, I think ignoring is certainly not our intent. Nuclear has been a very important part of our foundation, really, of our diversified fuel mix, for the last 30, 40 years. I think when we looked at this slide, to me, is probably where we should have shown the 2% addition. I think we didn't originally because the Vision 2027 generation plan as approved did not include new nuclear. So we were kind of reporting the percentages of what the plan called for, but I think it is an omission from this slide that we should show that we are adding nuclear. I think as we look forward, from the Vision 2027 generation plan, additional nuclear was not a big component. I think mainly to your question, because I think that new nuclear is going to be more likely as we get into probably the middle part of the 2030s, maybe the early part of the 2030s, depending on where investment comes in improvements in the licensing process. And so the focus, I think, really is where it will come in after 2030. And I think that's one of the big opportunities with this generation plan refresh is to see, when you look at all the updated costs around nuclear, around natural gas generation, around wind, solar storage, how does nuclear compete and where does it show up from, both in terms of cost and also in terms of carbon-free electricity and an opportunity to provide that base load type of generation. So I do think it's going to be a more not interesting, but I think it'll be a larger discussion around this gen plan refresh about the prospects for new nuclear than we saw 3 years ago, is my opinion.
Kevin, maybe that leads to my question in terms of the community. What is our target in terms of their engagement compared to how many folks we engaged with last time? Are we aiming for an increase in 5%, 1%? I don't know if there's some thought to that, and maybe it's a phone a friend.
I was going to say, not to put anyone on the spot, but I would like to phone a friend or ask the audience on this one. Since we have the expert here.
Yeah, thank you. That was a really good question. I was just talking to my team about that. We will look back at our Vision 2027 generation plan. That engagement was really robust. We know we have a time frame that we're going to have to meet. So we think we can do at that or better. So we want to be realistic in that as well, but we can get you with that previous report and some numbers there too with the target. Just the other thing I'll add is, there's some dates on these presentations that are going to change. We are going to come to you all with all of those dates for engagement so that we can have your participation as well. It's something that we talked about during the community and customer working group. That'll be our call to action for you all to help us with that engagement too.
Thank you, Melissa. Chris, you have a question? I'm running that way.
Thanks. Here we go again. All right. Well, this is really educational and helpful to see. And I don't know if you have a different framework in terms of what your benchmark timeframes are going to be, as opposed, 5 years versus every 3 years for an additional refresh because conditions are changing so rapidly. And then sort of a footnote to that, given what you may have learned with the acquisition of the LNG facilities the last couple of years, and what you're seeing in the market out there to the extent that you can share and it's not proprietary or behind an NDA, the low-hanging fruit of existing facilities seems to be disappearing pretty rapidly. What are you hearing from other participants in ERCOT in terms of competition for either construction capacity or the rest, and how that might affect the ability to bring new capacity online?
I think very good question. One thing I think in response to the first part of your question that I would like to point out, I think David talked about it too, but when we look at our generation plan and how we look at the future year build out, we're constantly looking at that, right? That's one of the reasons why, as an opportunity to acquire assets came up, we knew exactly where that might fit into our generation plan and how we might be able to improve the approved plan. But every year we go through a process where we're looking at what are the needs of the community? What is our load forecast? How does that change? To me, what's a little bit different about this refresh is bringing in, actually it's the same third-party subject matter expert that we used with the Gen Plan effort 3 years ago, Charles River Associates, but bringing them in again to do the very detailed modeling. And we do elements of that all the time, every year, but the way we did it 3 years ago and the way we're doing it today is a little bit different, a little bit more robust than what we might do on a yearly basis. And it's largely because of the time and effort that it takes to do that. So, but we are constantly looking at the generation plan. I think as you said, when we look at the market, if you will, the availability for additional used resources, I think that is a very limited market, right? I think when we look at the prospects around new builds, I think we're seeing a tremendous amount of pressure, not only in the generation industry, but just I think with reshoring and everything in general, there's just at data centers is one thing. When you look at the amount of growth that's going on and the draw for construction resources, particularly when you look at electrical components, switchgear, breakers, transformers, and then even on the generation side, when you look at the supply chain for turbines and things like that. I mean, the backlogs are filling up, factories are pretty full, and so the queue to get things out, the lead time where it may have been 2-3 years in the past has probably grown to 3 to 5 years, right? So it's not, I think, that the prospects to construct, I think, are still there. What's changing because of the demand is the time to do it, and then the cost to be able to do it because of, when there's limited supply versus demand, right, it's, price goes up. So I think that's more what we're seeing is impact on cost and schedule.
And I do want to circle back on that first point is, as we look at the generation plan in perpetuity, we're coming up with a process, a more formalized process, and we're making sure to track all of our touch points and include those as part of our process. So anytime we feel the need to update the generation plan, we're going to include community input, come to this committee, come to the board. It won't be done in secret. It's all going to be part of this big open process, and that's going to be our standard going forward.
So I have a question based on the different options that you guys have provided. Do any of these options put any constraints on the forecasted growth of our community? Is there any option that's going to say, hey, we could go with option 3, but then that may put constraints on the further growth, maybe a moratorium of some sort, or just, hey, we got to be just cognizant or more conservative on how we're looking at energy. Just how does this align with the forecasted growth as well?
The forecasted growth really is one of the starting points. It's one of the key assumptions, that goes into the analysis. So you've also got, market pricing, in terms of price of power, price of natural gas. All those kind of assumptions are what we start with, and then the different pathways forward or potential pathways really are all built on kind of one of the key constraints is we need to serve the load that we're forecasting. That's one of the key elements, right? And so we then look at what does it cost to do that, and what is the impact in terms of emissions and our ability to how quickly we're moving towards the cap targets. But constraining, the growth is, like I said, it kind of works for us the exact opposite. Is we try to look at how the community is growing, and that's, as the city-owned utility, we think, we have a duty to serve, right? And so that's where we start.
We have Julian and then Michael. Go ahead.
So the last time we heard about the generation plan refresh was in July, when we got most of that presentation was about the ERCOT market trends, et cetera. But it says here that fall 2025 plan refresh update 2022 assumptions and developments. Has that been done yet? I mean, it doesn't say whether this was by fall 2025 or beginning in fall 2025. So have we updated the 2022 assumptions?
Yes.
Okay.
That effort, I think, that you said about fall 2025, that's what we're in the middle of, if you will, right now. So I'd say over the course of the summer, we really spent that part of the time updating all the assumptions. Again, when you look at load forecasts, market prices, fuel prices, et cetera, cost of generation, and those assumptions now are being incorporated into the modeling that's underway right now. And so, excuse me, we wanted to make sure we were talking to you about the process and kind of where we are, because as we work through over the next couple months, really as we get into probably mid-November is when we anticipate that we'll start to have the results from that modeling to be able to start to kind of pull that story together and share with everybody. So it's the assumptions have been updated and we're working through the modeling now.
Yeah, so I'm just struggling to understand what has been accomplished since the last time we heard about the plan refresh. I mean, we already got a presentation about how that process is going to play out, thank you for recapping that. But when we get in a room, I really have a desire to see new data and like new updates, and so we don't have that yet. But you're saying it's still work in progress, and we'll have the results of that soon.
Yes, I think we fully anticipate being back in front of this group with the results of that process to share with you.
And that should include a set of updated assumptions to show you the changes.
Mr. Koenig?
So our current plan is just 3 years old, and from what I think I heard you say is we're addressing this new plan a little earlier than we would have normally because the demand increases are twice what we had estimated. I guess what I'd like to understand is what changed in the market that we got the demand estimate so wrong?
I think the demand forecast, I would say, is two big changes, I think, in my opinion. One is, I think our area continues to experience tremendous growth just from a residential perspective, right? I don't, this area, I think the I-35 corridor continues to be among the fastest growing counties in the country pretty regularly. So I think we see that. And I think the other thing that is probably the step change from 3 years ago that is impacting our community, it's also impacting, I'd say, the entire state of Texas and probably the entire United States is really the growth of the data centers and artificial intelligence. That's probably the biggest step change, if you will.
I will say that kind of piggybacking, that was kind of the point of my question of like, if we are wanting as a community to be positioning ourselves for opportunities for businesses to come here, and a lot of the businesses that we pursue are those that are tech companies, or we have data centers that are coming in. Does this, and you mentioned it, the pivot on looking at the demand was because of this drastic growth. Are we cushioning ourselves moving forward to also be able to address any type of drastic growth, not just looking at what we currently have and how the current stance is going to forecast, but also if there's any changes to that would increase that growth? Because I mean, yes, I would hope that today's current demand is a baseline, but what are we looking at if we're looking at the future of our community as a whole?
I think I would answer that, I think, in two ways. One is, and we talked about this, I think, for those that were involved in the detailed modeling and stuff that we did 3 years ago, we plan for what we call a reserve margin. So it's about a little under 14% above what our load forecast is. So that gives us margin. So as we see short-term changes, things that we're again, on a given summer, maybe weather is warmer than expected, or in a winter is colder than expected, or load growth changes more, on a shorter term basis. That margin, reserve margin, is what allows us to meet that on a short term basis. From the longer term kind of changes like we're talking about today, that's why in our mind, the need to do these types of, it's annual planning, and we're looking at it constantly, right? So as we see things change more, grossly is not the right word, but the larger load forecast, the long-term forecast is changing. Being able to look at it regularly as we do gives us the ability to change our plan with enough time to react, right? I think if we weren't looking at it that way, we'd find ourselves, what we don't want to do is find ourselves where we see the load forecast changing, but we don't have time, to put in the transmission or distribution development or infrastructure that we need from the wire side of the business. We don't have time to acquire the generation assets that we need to serve it. So I think that's why when we look at our integrated planning process, it's a continual really flow of information through the company to
And I will say, I want to give you guys credit. I know that it was mentioned you guys have been here before. A lot of times we see from public entities that we create something, we put it on a shelf, and it collects dust. So you mentioning that this is a living document of a sort where we are continuously looking at it to ensure that it continues to evolve into what we need it to be. I appreciate you saying that. I think that it needs to be said publicly, that the reason why we continue to hear something, even if it is feeling like we're continuing to hear from the same wheel, it's intentional. And you guys are being intentional with wanting to understand from us what we need to be hearing from you guys, and that this is a great response to that, because we've been asking, and as long as I've been on this committee, to continue to hear what the update is, even if the update is we're still looking at it. So thank you for that.
I thank you for taking the way I described it and translating it into a little bit better wording around the living document.
My husband's an engineer. I'm used to taking jargon and looking at it and making it into layman's terms, so thank you.
Guilty as charged. I'm an engineer as well.
We have another question right here.
All right, I have a quick reflection from the presentation and sort of the recent conversation around like the load demand and the concern that it'll again fall on customers. So that just hearing this is what it kind of accumulates to. And then my question is that I believe next year, the cap goals are also going to be revisited. And so what is the intersections between this generational planning as well as the planning that the city is currently going to be leading about the new data sets related to the cap plan?
From a cap perspective, I think, as Rudy said earlier, our plan is to continue to drive towards achieving the goals of the original cap until it's changed. Angela, hate to put you on the spot, but anything that you could add to that part of the conversation? I know you're much closer to the city's efforts at this point.
Yeah, Diana, hi. So we are on the SA Climate Ready Board, and so as the city has been planning to update the cap goals, I keep this team informed on those. So as those change, we'll continue to monitor. This round of modeling is being done with the current goals because that's all we have in place, but we're constantly looking for the updates.
Thank you. Does anybody else have a question?
I'm wondering in terms of unintended knock-on effects because of the amazing accomplishment here of firming up new capacity early in the time frame. And if John Kelly were here, he might be thinking of highway expansion. You add those extra lanes, and for a while there, you can handle more capacity, but it's almost as if it attracts more capacity, and then you end up with congestion again fairly quickly. By firming up this capacity early, is there any evidence from other places inside ERCOT when new generation comes online that it attracts more applicants for data centers? It's not a long time frame we can look back on, but are we creating additional demand faster that might also be impacted in terms of our ability to have limits on our bond rating for expanded capacity to meet the unanticipated new capacity demands?
Are we so good it's bad?
Yeah. Well, my answer to the specific question is no. I don't believe that the acquisition either of Corpus Christi, Laredo, or these latest assets is a driver in terms of kind of attracting additional growth. And the reason I say that is because the amount the number of companies and folks that are talking to us and were talking to us well before those announcements were made, and the number of megawatts that they're talking about potentially bringing in terms of their facilities, we've seen, I think, very large numbers well before any of those announcements were public. I think what drives them, I think, Lawson, to your comment, is honestly what drives them or attracts them, I think, to San Antonio is the fact that we are a very reliable, affordable, dependable utility that's also a very dependable partner. I think that is what attracts folks to this area in South Texas, much more so, I think, than what we're doing as far as specific kind of announcements on the generation plan.
Yeah, and I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the ERCOT perspective. So ERCOT is a great place to interconnect. I've been in the market for over 15 years in one form or fashion. Everybody that comes to the ERCOT meetings from around the country, they're like, it's so easy to interconnect here. I don't have to wait 8 years to get something to go through the feds. So we are part of that bigger system, and we are part of that reason that the system is so good. You can interconnect people, you can interconnect generation and loads very quickly and very easily compared to the rest of the country, which makes us a big target for data center development.
Go ahead, Tom.
So kind of piggybacking on that, relative to our competition or our generation partners, right, in the state of ERCOT and even nationally, right, are there many people building new plants today that are ground start new plants, or are they converting mostly? So you mentioned the supply line demand is through the roof and timelines are out there and so forth. Is that conversion or is that new builds?
I think it's a really good question. I think it's a little all of the above, honestly. I think I think in other parts of the country, I think we're seeing new builds probably more quickly than we're seeing right now here in ERCOT. I think some of that deals with market construct, where in certain parts of the country where you have a true capacity market, the way a developer recovers their investment is a little bit different than in the energy-only market here in ERCOT. So I think from a new gas build, I think ERCOT is a little bit slower to ramp up right now than other parts of the country. But we continue to see within ERCOT a very strong queue in terms of solar additions, storage additions. We touched a little bit on nuclear, but there's been several announcements in the last few months about small modular reactors and micro reactors and partnerships and power purchase agreements between new technology providers and large utilities or large customers. Some of those, again, if you look at like Constellation and announcing a restart of 3 Mile Island, that's truly a restart. Others, when you look at some of their projects, they're really looking to build new small modular reactors. So to me, it's a combination of all the above.
So is ERCOT trying to drive anything new like that? Because, with the increase in demand, to Chris's question earlier about, the fact that there's not a lot being built today new, is there a drive? Are you being incented? Are you being asked for new builds?
So there's a couple of efforts that I would say at ERCOT, but they're mostly driven, I would say, by the legislature listening to ERCOT basically say, here's what we see for supply, here's what we see for demand. We think there's going to be a shortage. Legislature need to do something. There was a Texas Energy Fund a few sessions ago, which the government or the state put aside $10 billion to help it create an incentive for generators. There's some grant money, some low interest loan money, just to get that ball moving on the generation development side. I'd say that their interconnections are already very easy compared to others, so they're doing everything they can to try and raise the alarm bells with the right folks, but ERCOT doesn't have the ability to create an incentive without the PUC and the legislature. So they kind of have to work hand in hand as a bigger, governmental regulatory or body. But we are seeing that we are hearing that alarm being rang that we're going to start to outgrow the system if we don't do something, which is why we've seen what we've seen so far. And the only other thing I can mention, not on the generation incentive side, but on maybe the growth side, is that the legislature at this last session passed a bill to help create some rules and regulations around large loads and data centers. What do they have to do? How does a load forecast include them? What kind of demand response programs can the state create that these would be providing services to, so that maybe we can shut off data centers before we start rolling, blackouts on loads and things like that. So there's some programs in the works to help manage both sides of that equation.
Thanks.
All right, folks, I know that we are a little over time. Thank you guys for coming out and presenting this. I assume we'll see you again. Are we going to see them again before they go present to the board? Was that the plan?
Yeah, in November.
Okay.
That is the plan, is we'll be visiting with you before the board.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you guys so much, and also thank you for appreciating and respecting our input so much that's a part of your timeline to come talk to us to make sure we judge some of these things out. And I hope that we gave enough feedback that is tenable for you guys to want to be able to utilize. So thank you. And then I'm going to move right into new business very quickly before we I adjourn. Our next big meeting will be we have our subcommittee meeting coming up
December
in November, and then we have our yes. So at our next meeting, we will be having the elections. So I just want to start putting that into everybody's mind, start thinking about nominations and also any type of feedback on this year. I want to I'm soliciting it for myself to see what we can do better to ensure that moving forward, we are continuing on the right path, especially with the new bylaws. I want to just again reiterate my thanks and appreciation for the presenters that came out today. I always appreciate that they take the time to do that. Elena, Corey, David, Kevin, phenomenal, and I really did appreciate the conversations that were had amongst our committee. And without further ado, I'm good. Are you guys good? Okay, that's it. I'm going to go ahead. Oh, Steve, you have a question, comment?
I do think, I mean, the proposal is that the subcommittee, well, I'm not going to quit calling them subcommittees. The working groups would meet in November and would all get a presentation, another presentation on the update, on the Gen Plan update.
In December, I'm being told. The Gen Plan update will be complete in December. In November, I don't have that subject matter yet. I was just told it was December.
So we're not sure about the subcommittee meetings in November.
The working
What we're
groups
gonna-
in November, we haven't
I gotta
released.
quit this.
We haven't released that agenda yet, but as soon as we know, I will. Yes, ma'am. No, you go right ahead.
So I think in an earlier conversation that Rudy mentioned, and I think it was discussed briefly, so these dates, and Melissa had mentioned, these dates are still being worked on. Our goal is to err on the side of inclusion, right? So we're not marching to some arbitrary date to get something done. Obviously, we're very driven people, right? We're project managers, we're engineers. But so just know that the dates that you've seen are subject to change because the intent is that we get robust feedback and we want to make sure that we're getting before subcommittees, but also that we're having ample time in our community to get feedback. So Melissa, is that fair? Did I state that correctly? Okay, so I don't want y'all to get married to we're marching to a blind date and we're going to do it. The quality is as important, it's more important than the speed, right?
Thank you, Elena. Thank you so much.
Okay, so Chris, so what you're saying is we may or may not have another presentation
At
on
some
the Gen Plan
point.
update in November, but we will definitely have it in December at our CEC meeting. But
If the numbers are
working
ready by
groups-
that point.
The working groups, we're not sure.
Right. If
We
the
will-
numbers
we will-
are.
We will hear back from the staff on that.
Yes, you will
Okay.
hear back from staff on that. Thank you.
Madam Chair, just clarifying the December.
Yes.
4 p.m.?
Yes.
Yes, so there is a time change for the December meeting. It will be Thursday, December 18th at 4 p.m. And if there's no more questions, yes, Dr. Vidal.
Well, just here it says Wednesday, November 12th at 11 a.m., but the original invite was for 11:30.
30. It was
So
my mistake. I apologize for
Okay,
that.
so
was
it wasn't
11:30.
changed, it's still 11:30. Okay.
It also says subcommittee, and it's a working session now, so there's just, we're learning. Again,
We
are,
did those before the vote.
Yes,
I'm getting-
yeah. We just changed the spokes on the wheel, so we're getting there. All right, folks, I am going to, it is 1:19. I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you.